Old Dan by Dan L. Hollifield. Old Dan lived up on the ridge somewhere. Some said it was up near Eagle Bluff. Some said it was further off towards the lake, but it was well away from the usual stomping grounds of the city folk that hunted up that way. Nobody knew quite where. I hear tell that the sheriff knew how to find this place, but only ever went up there alone. Even then, only when he needed the old man's help or advice. There was stories, you see, about the old man up on the ridge. He showed up at the general store in Jacksboro for supplies about once a month. Sometimes at weddings, sometimes to attend funerals. Once or twice when a new baby was baptized. Didn't matter which church. If old Dan graced your service, you counted yourself blessed, 'cause you felt you were. He'd come walking into town, pair of dogs at his heels, wearing a big hooded wool coat like a mountain man would in the cold weather or the rain. Well-worn overalls underneath and big boots on his feet. He had a gray beard and long silver gray hair tied up in back like a Cherokee. Had a hat that looked like it could have come straight off a rebel soldier or a riverboat man. It done seen some years, I tell you, but it was clean, if a little worse for wear. Sometimes he had a tall walking stick made out of a hickory sapling. He'd buy his victuals at the store, maybe trade the grocer man a fine mess of watercress or spinach greens or a sack full of fresh-picked corn for some of it. Always paid in cash, or old coins. Then he'd put his groceries away in a big old one-strap oilskin sack he'd throw over his shoulder. Then he walked out of sight back towards the ridge. Polite man. Quiet, too. Soft-spoken. But he had an eye for the ladies. Made him feel special when he offered a word, tipped his hat, and made more'n a few of 'em blush from a quiet remark and a gentle smile. And that voice of his was like magic, like silk on bare skin. Many a fair maiden wished it was still fashionable to swoon when he sweet-talked her. Nobody knew who his family was. Nobody knew how long he'd lived up on the ridge. Nobody knew for sure just how old he was. He was just always there, somewhere around, like the hills themselves or the rivers or the oak trees on the mountains. But all the same, people stayed away from where he thought his house was, especially after that time the revenue men come running back down off the ridge like they was being chased by a bear. Seems that they thought he must be running a still up there. Well, maybe he was, but nobody ever claimed to have bought any liquor off of him. So they marched themselves up on the ridge with their dogs and their guns and their shiny badges. And then they come running back down like the wrath of God was behind them with the flaming sword, like right out of the Bible. Old Dan turned the guns and badges in to the sheriff when he come down the ridge himself a week or so later. Said they must have throwed him down and run faster, whatever they thought was chasing him. Said his dogs was barking up a ruckus that evening, fit to chase off a mountain lion, he said. And he'd found the shooting irons and 10 stars laying around on the trail when he next come down to go to town, like he was just picking up the trash left behind by careless hunters. The sheriff was always respectful to old Dan. Few of the revenue men told stories about coming up to a place on the ridge where the native rock grew out of the ground like pillars of some ancient temple. Half was melted and other half hand-hewn. But hewn by whose hands? Human hands? Or other? Some talked of a small house and a garden and sounds of a party in full swing. Or a quiet mansion surrounded by the feelings of goodwill, peace, and contentment. Still others talked of guard dogs, or were they bears, or wolves the size of bears. Some wished to return under other circumstances, to join that party they thought they'd heard. Others moved away, way out west in the empty spaces of the desert, where they could be sure that nothing was sneaking up on them. And still others chose to retire, to move up on the ridges and valleys of the Smoky Mountains in search of some kind of peace and fulfillment inside themselves that they never knew they needed till that night. The old man always turned up search parties when somebody went missing in the woods or out by the lake. Him and his dogs would join the party, and almost always found the path where the folks got lost. Sheriff said they was good hunting dogs, that's all. Nobody ever said a bad word about the old man. He was kind of standoffish, but kind and generous to everybody. Now, once he did have a throwdown with that so-called traveling preacher that come through, and people was saying preacher was getting handsy with some of the children. Old Dan showed up at the preacher's revival tent unexpected like one even, dressed up in his finest Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, an old suit that was clean if a tad out of style, with a starch collar, one of them there string ties them Kentucky colonels like to wear. Looked downright impressive to hear tell. Took to the stage to stand by the lectern without any warning, and proceeded to give one of the most hellfire and brimstone sermons anybody could recollect ever hearing. Started off with "Suffer not the little children," and then went on about how the fiery pit was ready for them that dares lay a hand on one of the Lord's precious little angels, all the while giving a look to that preacher that made a platoon of hardened soldiers quake with fear. Everybody's waiting on the lightning to fall down on that preacher. No man's sermon was that powerful. Preacher packed up in the middle of the night and run off to further pastures, and left his tent behind. The fact that old Dan's two dogs went on stage with him and sat, unbidden, to either side of the old man's feet, showing the teeth of that preacher and quiet, that growling a warning, didn't do anything to gentle the stories afterward none. Them dogs got respect from the people, too. About them dogs, people said they was part wolf, maybe mostly the wolf, or looked it anyways. They was waist-high at the shoulder and muscled like a full-grown bull, and walked like they was the wrath of God incarnate. Children wasn't afraid of 'em. The local ne'er-do-wells feared 'em, and the would-be toughs did, too. One dog was dark brown, the other's black, both of 'em long-haired, and generally looked like them German police dogs, but the biggest you'd ever seen in your life. The old man didn't have to give 'em commands. Just clicked his tongue and pointed, or just pointed without saying a word. And the dogs went and did what he wanted them to go and do, like they was a force of nature, but his to command. They didn't frighten cats, neither. The old man attracted cats like a magnet tugs on cold iron, but the dogs never even growled at 'em, nor they them in return. Cats loved the old man. Birds, too, but that was spooky. He named the dogs Thunder and Lightning. Thunder was the brown dog, Lightning was the black one. They was always around the old man, even when you couldn't see 'em nowhere. Some young tough would start to give old man trouble, and them dogs came out of nowhere, like storm clouds coming out from behind the ridge to drop a summer squall or a tornado. They was always quiet, too, leastways as they wanted to be loud, and then they growled like a lynx the size of a bull. Ain't nobody alive wants to hear that sound. No siree. Now about those stories about the old man. One I heard tell of once concerned the day when the local coal mines had a whole gallery collapse. Right about shift change, the night workers shuffled out looking for the fellas on the day shift and found a rock fall blocking the road out and in. Nobody heard the rock slide in the night. Nobody felt it happen, neither. It was just there one morning like it always been there, right across the only road to the mine. Everybody got delayed going home or coming in. Nobody was the least bit happy about it. Then they heard a cave-in groaning and a moving, and the dust come a-boiling out of the mine entrance like the hateful breath of the devil himself. 4 of the miners was still inside, but over 50 of 'em was out, day shift and night shift alike. One of the miners up topside claimed he saw old Dan standing way up on the hill from where the rockfall happened, but then, like magic, he was there in amongst 'em, taking charge and giving orders like he expected to be obeyed, like he was in command all of a sudden, and the men found they was doing it, whatever the old man said to do. His quiet voice carried to every ear. Whatever he said had impacted the gospel itself, and everyone there pitched in to clear the mine entrance so the men trapped inside might have a ghost of a chance of getting out alive. I hear tell the old man waded in himself, throwing rocks aside like they was so much sponge cake. The dogs was there a-digging and a-scratching at the rocks right next to the old man. Seemed like half the cats in the county, too. There was even talk of an eagle flew down. It started scratching at the rocks like a chicken, flinging rocks out the way. 'Tweren't long before everybody knew they'd need even more help to save the men inside the mine. Runners set out to alert the townsfolk, but that would have took some time. Then the old man called the crows. Way I heard it, soon as the runners set out, the old man stood up straight, taller than anybody ever remembered him to be, grabbed his walking stick and jabbed it in the ground like it's a fence post. Sparks flew from the tip of the stick when it struck the rock. The old man tipped his head back and started calling like a crow. His voice echoed from the hills and the ridges, getting louder and louder. Then the crows come. They come up like a thundercloud, darkening the sky in their multitude, circling like a tornado, and then split to head for all the nearby towns. Like rivers of ink in the cloudless blue sky, they set up such a ruckus in the towns that people just had to come outside and see what was the matter. And then they came, following the path the crows marked out, till every able-bodied soul for miles around started heading for the mine. Long story short, there was soon near a couple of 100 folks at the mine, clearing away rubble till the men inside was able to crawl out. Not one life was lost that day. By the time the last man got out, the birds were gone, and when the folks began to look around for the old man, well, he was gone too. But his stick was still set in the ground, as unmovable as an oak tree, stout as the old hickory it was made of. Nobody could budge it an inch. In the mine gave an almighty groan as another collapse hit its halls. Coal dust and dirt boiled out in a choking cloud. When folks remembered to look at the stick again, it was gone without a trace, like a dam blocking the mighty river. When the stick was removed, the mine collapsed completely. Not one life was lost that day. There was another story. One time, a little girl, about 12 years old or so, got caught in a sudden snowstorm up on the ridge where she'd gone berry picking for Granny to make a pie for the family Sunday dinner. People searched, but couldn't find her. As it got too dark for even lanterns to guide their steps, they heard what they thought was wolves howling in the distance. They shuffled home in the growing darkness, heads downcast, bereft of hope for the safe return of their little girl. The families, they spent a sleepless night in prayer for the safety of their daughter. Churches held all-night vigils, likewise in prayer, till dawn the following day. Come the sun the next day, even before the townspeople could once again set out to search, old Dan in his heavy woolen coat come striding into town, big boots crunching the fresh snow with every step, dogs beside him, as he made his way to the home of the family of the missing girl. His coat was tied tightly about his waist, sleeves empty, and his dog Thunder stood up on hind legs to knock on the family's door. The mother of the girl wrenched the door open as if she was wanting to tear it off its hinges. Without a word, old Dan went in, opened his coat from the inside, and laid the little girl on her granny's feather bed. Covering her with a thick blanket, he turned and softly spoke to the mother and grandmother and father. "Don't try and wake her," he said. "She's in a healing sleep. She won't feed when she wakes up tomorrow morning. Give her whatever she wants, but please make sure she drinks this potion before she eats anything." He handed the mother a tall old medicine bottle, like from the days before the Great War. "It's just herbs to help her body heal from the cold. She'll be tired for several days. She'll eat like a horse. She'll sleep a lot for the next few days, but she will heal completely. She won't remember what happened to her after the snow began to fall. She won't remember my finding her, taking her to my house and feeding her, giving her a potion to help her sleep without pain. She told me her name was Aurora, but I know you named her Beverly, after her great-grandmother. Fine woman, did real good for herself. Call the girl Aurora from now on. She chose the name. It suits her. She'll never be sick another day in her life. She'll grow to be a strong woman. She'll find a good man to wed when she's grown herself. I'll see to that. Oh, she'll give you no end of trouble till she takes a husband. After that, he'll have to watch his own steps. When the school here has taught her everything it can, tell her I'm willing to teach her herb lore and medicine and all manner of practical things, but only if she so chooses to learn those. Her life will ever be her own, but for now, she's under my protection. Blessings be upon this house and all that dwell within it, forever and ever. Amen." With that, he bowed to the father, bowed to the mother, and took the grandmother's hand, kissing it. "I remember thee, Rosemary," he said to her. "Thy pecan pie is worthy of the gods themselves. You have ever been blessed in my memory, and in the memories of the others. When your work is done, I will remember thee. For all my days, I will remember thee. Did I not tell thee once that thou wilt have a long and happy life, granddaughter? I see that thou hast, indeed, gained everything thou wished to have, and at the end of days, my house is ever open to thee, if that is still thy wish." Then he left, back into the snow, dogs at his sides, to return to the ridge above the town until needed again. That's just a small sample of the stories surrounding old Dan, where he came from, when he came from, where his house on the ridge is, and why he does what he does, or how he does what he does. No one knows. Maybe he was there when the sun first ever shone over the Smoky Mountains. Maybe longer. As to why he cares so much about his neighbors, maybe the clue's in the name. Old Dan, Old Dan, Old Dan, Odin. Perhaps. If so, then who are the others the old man spoke of? Maybe, just maybe, if we're really lucky, if we're kind and gentle and compassionate, magic is loose in the world tonight. The end.